The only reason I went back that night was because it was New Year's. Not Christmas. Not Thanksgiving. New Year's felt neutral enough. No gifts, no pressure to stay long. Just dinner, a countdown, and then I could take my daughter and leave. I hadn't been home in months. The base was 3 states away and my leave window was short. Maya was excited in that quiet way kids get when they don't fully trust excitement yet. She wore the blue sweater her Aunt Lauren had given her last year. It was a size too small now, but she insisted on it anyway. I let her. It felt easier than arguing over something that didn't matter. My parents' house looked the same as it always had. Clean. Controlled. Everything in its place. Lauren's car was already in the driveway. Of course it was. She lived 10 minutes away. She was always early. Inside the house smelled like roast meat and whatever candle my mother was currently obsessed with. Lauren's voice carried from the kitchen loud and confident, telling a story no one else could interrupt. My mother laughed at the right moments. My father sat at the table nodding a long fork already in hand, like he was waiting for permission to start eating. No one noticed us come in right away. Maya stayed close to my side. She always did in rooms like that. Big rooms, loud adults. Too many rules she didn't understand but somehow knew she was supposed to follow. Lauren finally turned and saw us. Her smile was quick and tight. "Hey," she said, like we were coworkers running into each other at the grocery store. She bent down and kissed Maya on the top of the head, then stood up straight again and went right back to her story. I didn't comment. That was our dynamic. She talked, I listened. It had been that way since we were kids. Dinner was already set when we sat down. There were assigned seats, even though no one ever said they were assigned. Everyone just knew where they belonged. Lauren sat at the head of the table near my father. Her son sat next to her. My mother took the opposite side. There was an empty chair between my mother and Lauren's son. Maya hesitated for half a second, then sat in the empty chair. That was it. That was the mistake. Lauren stopped talking mid-sentence. The room didn't go quiet right away. It was more like the sound drained out slowly, like someone turning down a volume knob. Lauren looked at Maya, then at the chair, then back at Maya again. "No," she said. "Just that. Flat. Not there." Maya froze. She looked at me confused, already pulling her hands into her lap. "That seat is for family," Lauren said. I opened my mouth, but before I could say anything, Lauren took a step forward and put her hand on the back of Maya's chair. She didn't yank it. She didn't shove hard. She pushed just enough. The chair tipped. Maya went down with it. Her knee hit the floor first, then her hands, then the side of her hip. The sound wasn't loud. That's what stuck with me. It was dull, like furniture being dropped, not a person. For a split second, no one moved. Not my mother, who was close enough to reach out. Not my father, who watched the whole thing with his fork still in his hand. Not Lauren, who stood there with her arms crossed like she was waiting for someone to fix a problem she'd already decided wasn't hers. Maya didn't cry right away. She sat there on the floor, eyes wide, breathing fast, trying to understand what she'd done wrong. "That seat is for real family," Lauren said. "Move." The word real hung in the air longer than anything else. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. That sound finally got everyone's attention. My father flinched like the noise bothered him more than what had just happened. I crossed the room in 2 steps and knelt in front of Maya. Her knee was already red. She grabbed onto my sleeve like she thought the ground might move again. "I've got you," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I helped her up slowly. She leaned into me light and careful, like she was trying not to take up space. My mother finally spoke. "Let's not make this a thing," she said quickly. "It's New Year's." Lauren rolled her eyes. She should have known better. I looked around the table, at the faces I'd known my entire life, at the people who had watched my child hit the floor and decided silence was easier. That was when something clicked. Not anger, not shock, just clarity. I picked up my coat with one hand, Maya still pressed against my side. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I didn't wave it around. I didn't threaten anyone. I looked directly at Lauren. "You'll hear from counsel," I said. 4 words. Calm, even. The same tone I used in briefings when something had already gone wrong and pretending otherwise would only make it worse. The effect was immediate. Lauren's face drained of color. Not confusion, Not anger, recognition. My mother's hand jerked and her wine glass tipped over red liquid spreading across the tablecloth. My father stared at me like he was trying to calculate something and coming up short. No one followed us to the door. Maya didn't say anything as I helped her into the car. She buckled herself in without being asked. Her hands shook just a little as she pulled the strap across her chest. I started the engine and pulled away from the house. The light stayed on behind us. No one waved. No one called. Halfway down the street, Maya spoke. Her voice was small but steady. "Mom," she said, "did I do something wrong?" I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, kept my eyes on the road, and said the truth as clearly as I could. "No," I said. "You didn't." She nodded like she wanted to believe me but wasn't ready yet, and turned to look out the window as the neighborhood slid past us. House after house lit up for a new year that had already started without us. I didn't turn the radio on. I kept both hands on the steering wheel and drove the long way back the route with fewer stoplights, the one I usually took when I needed time to think without actually stopping. Maya watched the houses slide past the window, her forehead resting lightly against the glass. The neighborhood decorations blurred into strings of white and gold. She traced a finger along the edge of her seatbelt, slow and careful, like she was double-checking that it was really there. The heater kicked on, then off again. The car made its normal sounds. Nothing was broken. That somehow made everything worse. I glanced at her knee when we stopped at a red light. The fabric of her leggings had darkened where she'd fallen. She noticed me looking and pulled her leg back a little. "It's fine," she said quickly. That word again, fine. Kids learn it early. "Does it hurt?" I asked. She shrugged. Not a dramatic shrug, just enough to end the question. I nodded and waited for the light to change. A few blocks later, she spoke again. "Mom," she said, "did I mess up?" "No," I said immediately. She didn't respond. She just kept staring out the window. Another light, another stop. I could feel the weight of the silence pressing down between us, heavy but controlled the way it gets in briefing rooms, right before someone says something that changes the plan. "Was it because I'm not real family?" she asked. I pulled over. I didn't slam the brakes or throw the car into park dramatically. I signaled, eased over, and stopped under a streetlight like I was following a checklist. Hazard lights on. Engine running. I turned toward her fully. "No," I said. "I didn't rush it. You are my family. You didn't do anything wrong. What happened back there wasn't about you." She studied my face, searching for cracks. Kids know when adults are lying. They know when words are being used as padding instead of answers. Then why did she say that she asked? I took a breath. Not a deep one. Just enough to keep my voice steady. "Because some people decide who belongs based on things that don't actually matter," I said. "And they don't like it when they don't get to decide." She considered that, then nodded once like she was filing it away for later. We drove the rest of the way in silence. At the apartment, I carried her up the stairs, even though she was perfectly capable of walking. She didn't argue. She wrapped her arms around my neck and went quiet, her weight familiar and grounding. Inside, I set her on the couch and grabbed the first aid kit from the kitchen drawer. Ice pack, paper towel. I knelt in front of her and rolled up her leggings carefully. The knee was swollen now. Not alarming, but not nothing. I pressed the ice against it. She hissed, then relaxed when the cold settled in. "Sorry," she said, "for what I asked." She shrugged again. "For making it weird." That one landed harder than the question in the car. I looked at her. Really looked at her. 8 years old, already apologizing for other people's behavior. "You don't apologize when someone hurts you," I said. "Ever." She nodded, but her eyes stayed fixed on the ice pack, like she was waiting for the pain to prove me wrong. After that, we moved through the night on autopilot. Shower, pajamas, hot chocolate with too many marshmallows because rules had already failed us for the day. She curled up next to me on the couch while a movie played that neither of us really watched. Her head rested against my shoulder light, but insistent like she needed to know I was still there. When she finally fell asleep, I carried her to bed and tucked her in carefully, making sure the blankets didn't press against her knee. I stood in the doorway for a moment longer than necessary, listening to her breathe steady and slow. Then I went back to the kitchen and sat down at the table alone. The apartment was quiet in a way that felt earned. No raised voices, no tension humming under the surface. Just the soft tick of the clock on the wall. I took out my phone and opened the Notes app without really thinking about it. Old habit. When something went wrong on base, you didn't trust memory. You wrote it down while it was still clean. Time, location, who was there. I typed the date. New Year's Eve. I added the address. I listed names. I paused, then added one more line. Maya fell. No assistance offered. I stared at the words for a long moment, then locked the phone and set it face down on the table. I didn't feel angry. That came later. What I felt then was something quieter and more dangerous. The same feeling I got when a system wasn't working the way it was supposed to, and everyone else was pretending it was fine because fixing it would be inconvenient. I stood up and opened the cabinet under the sink, pulling out the folder where I kept important papers. Lease, insurance, medical records. I added the urgent care receipt from Maya's last visit, sliding it into the front pocket. Not because I planned to use it, because I didn't plan to ignore it. My phone buzzed on the counter. Lauren. I didn't open the message. I didn't need to. Whatever it was too late for explanations. A second buzz. My mother this time. I turned the phone face down again. In the bedroom, Maya shifted in her sleep and murmured something unintelligible. I waited until she settled, then closed the door softly behind me. Back at the table, I opened my laptop and logged into the account I hadn't checked in months. The one I used to keep track of everything that mattered when I wasn't around. Balances loaded slowly. Numbers appeared. Normal, mostly. One line caught my eye. Then another. I leaned closer, fingers hovering over the trackpad, and scrolled. It wasn't a big difference. Not the kind that sets off alarms. Just enough to be noticeable if you were looking for it. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen. The room quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. My mind already shifting from reaction to process, from what happened to what didn't add up. I dragged the cursor back up and refreshed the page the way people do when they don't want to believe what they're seeing but aren't ready to look away either. The numbers settled again, unchanged. I scrolled slower this time, line by line, the way I was trained to read logs when something small didn't match, and everyone else insisted it was noise. It wasn't a big discrepancy, not the kind that makes phones ring, just a few entries that didn't line up with the dates I remembered. Transfers labeled routine. Adjustments marked temporary. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would catch your eye unless you were already paying attention. I closed the laptop without shutting it down and leaned back in the chair. The kitchen light hummed faintly. I could hear the neighbor's TV through the wall. Normal sounds. Normal night. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. That had always been my rule. Facts first. Feelings later. Still, my jaw stayed tight. Growing up, I learned early how to read rooms. How to tell when a conversation wasn't meant for me, even if my name was in it. Lauren never had to do that. She walked into spaces like they were built for her. People adjusted. Chairs moved. Expectations softened. When we were kids, it showed up in small ways. She got called on first. She got praised for things I got corrected for. If she was late, it was because traffic was bad. If I was late, it was because I didn't plan well. My parents never said they preferred her. They didn't need to. Preference has a tone, a rhythm. You feel it long before anyone admits it. When I left for basic training, my father shook my hand and told me to make him proud. Lauren cried and promised to visit. She never did. When I came home on leave years later, she joked about how strict I'd gotten. How serious. Like discipline was a personality flaw. After Maya was born, the distance widened. Lauren had opinions about schedules, about childcare, about how hard it must be to be gone so much. My mother nodded along, offering solutions that always involved Lauren stepping in. I can help with paperwork, Lauren said once when I mentioned how much there was to manage while deployed. You don't need to worry about that stuff. At the time, it sounded like support. I stood up and poured myself a glass of water, then didn't drink it. My phone buzzed again on the counter. I ignored it and picked up the folder from under the sink, instead setting it on the table and flipping it open. Birth certificate. Insurance cards. A few old letters from the VA that I'd never thrown out because they felt important even when I didn't fully understand them. I checked the addresses. One of them was wrong. Not wildly wrong. Just an old one. A place I hadn't lived in for years. a place Lauren used to pick up mail for me when I was overseas, because it was easier than forwarding everything properly. I felt a familiar shift in my chest. The one that happens when you realize the problem isn't a single mistake, but a chain of small decisions no one thought you'd ever follow. I went back to the laptop and logged in again, this time pulling up the full history instead of the summary view. It took longer to load. I waited without tapping my foot or checking my phone hands flat on the table. Dates, amounts, notes. There it was again. A withdrawal tied to a category that didn't make sense. Not illegal, not obvious, just wrong. I opened another tab and checked a different account. Same pattern. Small. Spread out. Easy to explain away if you wanted to. I thought about Lauren's house. The renovations she'd mentioned offhand at dinner months ago. The new countertops she laughed about because they were a splurge. I'd smiled and said something polite the way you do when you don't want to count other people's money. I didn't smile now. In the bedroom, Maya coughed in her sleep and rolled onto her other side. I stayed where I was, eyes on the screen, resisting the urge to go check on her again. She was safe. Right now, she was safe. I opened my email and searched by keyword, scrolling past months of nothing until I found what I was looking for. A notification I'd skimmed once and forgotten. Another sent while I was on a different time zone, flagged as read without really being read. I clicked it. The language was bland, administrative, the kind designed not to alarm. A confirmation of an adjustment, a reminder about guardianship details. I scrolled to the bottom and saw a name I didn't expect to see there. Lauren, not as an owner, not as a beneficiary, as a contact. My phone buzzed again. This time I picked it up. From Lauren, don't overreact. She's fine. I set the phone back down. I didn't feel the urge to respond. That surprised me. In the past, I would have explained myself, softened things, found a way to make it less uncomfortable for everyone else. Instead, I opened a new note and started listing dates, transfers, addresses, names attached to accounts. It felt familiar, comfortable even. When you work in logistics long enough, you stop seeing problems as emotional events and start seeing them as systems with weak points. Someone knocked on the door down the hall. A neighbor. Laughter drifted in from the stairwell. Life moving on without waiting for my thoughts to catch up. I added one more line to the list. Temporary power of attorney deployment year. I remembered signing it. Standing in an office with bad lighting, pen scratching across paper while a clock ticked loudly on the wall. It had seemed like a formality, a way to keep things running while I was gone. I closed the note and saved it without naming it. In the bathroom, I washed my hands longer than necessary, watching the water run clear, then shut off the tap and dried them carefully. When I came back into the kitchen, I noticed something I hadn't before. The folder on the table wasn't as thin as I remembered. Papers had been added at some point. Not recently. Quietly. I sat down again and pulled them out one by one. Copies, not originals. Printouts with margins slightly off, like they'd been scanned and reprinted. Useful for reference. Not meant to raise questions. I stacked them neatly, aligning the edges the way I did when something needed to be looked at again later. In the living room, the movie menu looped back to the beginning and played the same cheerful music. I reached for the remote and muted it without looking. The silence settled back and heavier now, but structured. The kind that lets you work. I picked up the phone, opened my contacts, and scrolled past family names until I found one I hadn't used in a long time. Not a relative. Not a friend. A number I kept for situations that didn't need sympathy. I hovered over it for a second, then put the phone down and returned to the laptop, opening the statements again, zooming in on the dates, the amounts, the patterns that were starting to feel less accidental by the minute. I clicked into the detailed view and adjusted the date range, stretching it back year by year until the screen filled with rows that looked identical at first glance. Same fonts, same neutral language, same quiet confidence that comes from assuming no one is paying attention. I was paying attention now. I pulled up the first account tied to Maya's name. The one that had been set up after her father died, back when everything felt like paperwork and grief came in scheduled bursts. That account was supposed to be boring, stable, untouched, unless something truly went wrong. The balance wasn't zero. That was the problem. It was lower than it should have been, but not low enough to scream. I opened the transaction history and started reading from the oldest entry forward. Small withdrawals. Irregular timing. Always explained. Always labeled. Household support. Emergency expense. Temporary transfer. I did the math in my head as I scrolled. Not totals. Patterns. How often? How consistent? How careful? This wasn't someone panicking. This was someone pacing themselves. I opened a second account. Different purpose. Different funding source. Same drift. The numbers moved in a way that felt familiar, like watching supplies disappear slowly from a warehouse because someone was skimming just enough to stay invisible. I leaned back and rubbed my eyes, then sat up straighter and kept going. The insurance payout from her father's service had been handled years ago. That money was supposed to sit untouched, growing quietly until Maya was old enough for it to matter. It hadn't vanished. It had thinned. Enough to be useful to someone who knew how to justify it. Not enough to trip alarms. I scrolled down to the notes attached to one of the transfers and recognized the phrasing immediately. Family support. Lauren's favorite words. I pulled up the college savings plan next. The 529 I'd set up before Maya could even spell her name. That one hurt more than the others. Not because the balance was lower, but because the withdrawals were tied to dates I remembered clearly. The summer Lauren remodeled her kitchen. The fall she replaced her car. The winter she joked about finally catching up after a tough year. I closed that tab and opened the last account on the list. The one tied to monthly survivor benefits. Smaller amounts. Regular deposits. Designed to be steady. Designed to be boring. Designed to be easy to siphon. There were months where the deposit landed, then left again within days. Always partial, always explained, always neat. I checked the linked account information. The routing number wasn't mine. I stared at it longer than I needed to, waiting for my brain to offer an alternative explanation. It didn't. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark parking lot, my reflection faint in the glass. For a moment, I let myself feel it. Not anger. Not betrayal. Just the weight of realizing how long this had been happening while I was doing everything I was supposed to do. Deploying when ordered. Signing forms. Trusting the wrong people with the right access. I went back to the table and pulled out the folder again, this time spreading everything out. Statements, copies, letters, receipts. I lined them up by date and matched them against the transfers on the screen. It took time. I didn't rush it. Rushing is how mistakes happen. By the time I finished, the story was clear. While I was gone, Lauren hadn't taken everything. She'd taken what she needed, what she could explain, what she assumed I wouldn't notice because I was busy being somewhere else. My phone buzzed again, from my mother this time. We need to talk about tonight. I let it sit. I wasn't ready to hear explanations designed to make me doubt my own eyes. In the bedroom, Maya stirred and called out softly in her sleep. I went to her without thinking, sat on the edge of the bed, and rested my hand lightly on her shoulder until she settled again. Her breathing evened out. Her face relaxed. I stayed there longer than necessary, watching the rise and fall of her chest, reminding myself why this mattered. Back in the kitchen, I opened a fresh document and started writing everything down. Dates, amounts, account numbers, notes copied exactly as they appeared. I didn't add commentary. I didn't label anyone a villain. I let the facts stand on their own. Halfway through, I noticed something else. A signature, not forged. Authorized. Mine. Or close enough. I pulled up the scanned copy and zoomed in. The handwriting matched the version of my signature I used when I was exhausted and trying to get through a stack of forms before a flight. The one I barely recognized as my own. The form itself was legitimate. Temporary authority, limited scope, time-bound. The use of it was not. I saved the document and backed it up to an external drive, then emailed a copy to myself using an address I didn't share with anyone. Habit. Redundancy matters. The clock on the stove blinked past midnight. The new year had started hours ago. I poured the water I'd left untouched earlier down the sink and rinsed the glass, setting it upside down on the towel. The small domestic motion felt grounding, controlled. When I picked up my phone again, there were 3 missed calls. Lauren, my mother, my father. I didn't listen to the voicemails. Instead, I opened my contacts and scrolled to the name I'd hesitated over earlier. The one I kept for situations that required clarity, not comfort. I didn't call yet. I went back to the laptop and pulled one more report, this time exporting it instead of just viewing it. The progress bar crept across the screen, slow and steady. When it finished, I named the file with the date and saved it in a folder I'd just created. I shut the laptop and sat there for a moment, hands flat on the table, feeling the shape of the problem fully for the first time. Not as a family issue, not as a misunderstanding, as a system that had been quietly misused, and a child who had paid for it without ever knowing there was a bill. I slid the laptop back into my bag instead of leaving it out on the table, zipped it closed, and set it by the door like it was something I might need to grab quickly. Not to run, just to move without explaining myself. The shower ran hot, then cooled. I stood there longer than necessary, letting the water hit my shoulders while my mind worked through the same question from different angles. Not whether something wrong had happened. That part was settled. The question was how much noise I was willing to make to stop it. By the time I dressed and stepped back into the kitchen, the phone was still face down where I'd left it. I flipped it over and skimmed the notifications without opening them. Missed calls don't require answers. Information does. I picked up my keys and left the apartment, locking the door behind me out of habit, not urgency. The air outside was sharp and quiet. The parking lot was mostly empty, the kind of stillness that only happens when everyone else thinks the night is over. I drove 10 minutes to a place that didn't advertise itself with neon signs or slogans. Just a small office park with too many cars for how late it was. The light in one window was still on. I'd been given the number years ago, folded into a conversation I hadn't thought I'd need again. Someone who worked adjacent to the system, not inside it. Someone who understood how paperwork moves when uniforms are involved. I sat in the car for a moment with the engine running, then turned it off and went inside. The receptionist had already gone home. The man waiting for me stood up when I entered, offered his hand, and didn't ask why I was there. That told me I'd picked the right place. We sat across from each other at a plain table. No small talk. No sympathy. He waited while I pulled out the folder and set it between us. "Start from the beginning," he said. I didn't. I started from the middle. Dates, accounts, transfers, names attached to permissions. I spoke in short sentences, the way I was trained to brief people who didn't need emotion to understand a problem. He listened without interrupting, flipping through pages, making notes in the margins. "Who has access?" he asked. "Not me," I said. "Not anymore." "And the child?" he asked. "8," I said. "Mine." He nodded once and kept reading. When I finished, he leaned back slightly and folded his hands. "You're going to hear a lot of excuses," he said. "Family help, miscommunication, temporary arrangements." "I'm not interested in explanations," I said. "I'm interested in stopping it." "That's good," he said, "because explanations are loud. Records are quiet." He outlined the process without drama. Requests, audits, notices that didn't accuse but didn't ask permission either. The kind that forced people to respond on paper. "No phone calls," he said. "No warning." "I wasn't planning on it," I said. He paused, then looked at me more carefully. "Once this starts, it won't feel clean," he said. "People will get angry." "They already are," I said. "That's not the same," he said. "This will make them afraid." I didn't answer. Fear wasn't the goal. Protection was. I signed where he pointed, my hand steady, my name looping across the page the way it always did when I wasn't tired. He slid the documents into a file and stood up. "We'll handle the rest," he said. "You should go home." I did. Maya was still asleep when I got back. I stood in her doorway again, watching her breathe, then closed the door softly and leaned my forehead against the frame for a moment. Not because I was overwhelmed, because this was the last quiet moment I'd have for a while. The phone started ringing the next morning before I'd finished making coffee. Lauren first. I let it ring, then my mother, then my father. I poured the coffee, took a sip, and finally answered when the number I didn't recognize came through. "This is ridiculous," my mother said without preamble. "You embarrassed everyone." "I wasn't the one who pushed a child," I said. "She fell," Lauren said in the background. "You're twisting it." I didn't respond. Silence does strange things to people who expect resistance. "You don't need to involve outsiders," my father said. "We can handle this privately." "I am," I said. "Privately." I hung up before they could decide who would speak next. By noon, the messages changed tone. Concern. Worry. Confusion about why accounts were suddenly locked and letters were arriving that asked questions no one wanted to answer. Lauren showed up at my apartment that afternoon. I didn't open the door right away. I checked through the peephole first, then opened it just enough to hear her without inviting her in. "You've gone too far," she said, arms crossed, voice low. "This affects all of us." "It affects my daughter," I said. "That's the part you missed." She scoffed. "You weren't even around half the time. Someone had to manage things." "You managed yourself," I said. Her face hardened. "Don't pretend this isn't about money. It's about access," I said. "And you don't have it anymore." She leaned closer. "You think you're untouchable because of your job." I smiled slightly. Not because it was funny. Because it was wrong. "I think paperwork matters," I said. She stared at me for a long second, then stepped back. "You're tearing this family apart," she said. I closed the door. Inside, Maya sat at the table, coloring her knee propped up on a chair. She looked up when she heard the lock click. "Was that Aunt Lauren?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Is she mad?" she asked. I considered the question, then answered honestly. "She's upset she doesn't get to decide things anymore." Maya nodded like that made sense and went back to coloring, pressing the crayon harder than before, the paper holding steady under her hand. Later that evening, an email arrived confirming receipt of the requests. Formal language, clear timelines, no opinions. I forwarded it to a folder I'd already labeled and shut the laptop without rereading it. The apartment settled into its normal sounds again. Dishes drying, pipes ticking, Maya humming quietly in her room as she got ready for bed. I sat at the table, hands resting on the wood, and waited for the system to do what it does when someone finally asks it the right questions in the right order. The first envelope arrived while I was brushing Maya's hair, the paper thick and official enough to feel heavy even before I opened it. I set it on the counter, finished the braid, and tied it off like nothing else existed. "Too tight?" I asked. She shook her head. "It's good." I kissed the top of her head and sent her to grab her backpack. The envelope stayed where it was until the door closed behind her and the apartment went quiet again. Inside was exactly what I expected. Polite language, careful phrasing, a request for clarification framed as concern. The kind of letter that pretends to be neutral while letting you know someone has started telling a story without you in it. By noon, 3 more had arrived. Different senders, same tone. I laid them out on the table in a neat row and read them once, then again, not for content but for patterns. Words repeated. Phrases mirrored. Someone had coordinated this. My phone buzzed. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years, just checking in. "Heard things are rough." "A family friend. Are you doing okay?" "Your mom sounds worried." Worried, not angry, not confused. Worried is what people say when they want to sound reasonable while questioning your judgment. I set the phone down and opened the next letter. This one mentioned stress, deployment, adjustment difficulties. There it was. Lauren didn't call me crazy. She didn't have to. She just suggested concern and let everyone else fill in the blanks. By the time Maya got home from school, the narrative had spread. Quietly, efficiently, the way gossip always does when it wears a mask of care. I made dinner like nothing was wrong. Simple: chicken, rice, steamed vegetables. Normal food for a normal night. Maya talked about a science project. I nodded, asked questions, listened. After dishes, I checked my email again. A message from Lauren's number came through, but it wasn't from her. It was forwarded. Someone else's words. "We're worried Erin isn't handling things well. She's been under so much pressure. Maybe this isn't the best time for her to make big decisions." I stared at the screen until the words stopped blurring. I'd heard variations of that sentence my entire career. When women don't react the way people expect, concern becomes a weapon. I forwarded the message to my attorney without comment and deleted it from my inbox. That night, Maya climbed into my bed without asking. She didn't say anything, just curled up on her side and pressed her feet against my legs, like she needed the contact to ground herself. I let her stay. In the morning, there was another letter. This one from a different office. Same suggestions, same coded language. They weren't accusing me of anything directly. They were laying groundwork. I called the attorney on my way to work, hands steady on the wheel. "They're implying I'm unstable," I said. "They always do," he said. "It's lazy and it backfires if you don't take the bait." "I'm not," I said. I know, he said. So don't try to prove it. Keep doing exactly what you're doing. At lunch, my father finally called. I answered this time. This has gone far enough, he said without greeting. People are asking questions. They should, I said. You're making it sound like a crime, he said. It is, I said. Just not the one you're used to defending. He exhaled sharply. Lauren was helping, he said. You weren't here. I was deployed, I said. That's not the same thing. Silence stretched on the line. You're not thinking clearly, he said finally. After everything you've been through. There it was again. I ended the call. By the end of the week, the whispers turned into invitations I didn't accept. Coffee? Lunch? Let's talk this out. The people who wanted access to my emotions, now that they thought reason might not work. I didn't go. Instead, I organized. I scanned every new piece of mail. I logged dates and times of calls I didn't answer. I saved voicemails without listening to them, labeling each file carefully. The system thrives on documentation. Feelings don't survive audits. Paper does. Lauren showed up again on Saturday, this time with my mother. I didn't let them in. We just want to talk, my mother said through the door, voice tight. This isn't like you. It is, I said from the other side. You just didn't notice before. Lauren laughed, sharp and humorless. You think this looks good for you? Dragging everyone through this? Making people uncomfortable. I'm comfortable, I said. That's new for me. My mother started crying then. Real tears this time. Or close enough. You're hurting us, she said. I rested my forehead against the door. Not in surrender. In patience. You watched my daughter hit the floor, I said. You didn't ask if she was okay. That's when you made your choice. There was a pause, a shuffle. Lauren muttered something I couldn't hear. We're trying to protect Maya, my mother said. I smiled despite myself. No, I said. You're trying to protect yourselves. When they left, the hallway felt lighter. That afternoon, a formal notice arrived confirming temporary restrictions on access to certain accounts pending review. No blame, no drama. Just limits. Lauren called 5 minutes later. This is harassment, she said. You're attacking me. You had access you weren't supposed to have, I said. Now you don't. You think they're going to side with you, she said. After everything, after your record. My record is clean, I said. That's why this is working. She hung up on me. That night, Maya asked if we were going to see Grandma again. Not for a while, I said. Did I do something wrong, she asked. I set my fork down and looked at her. No, I said. You did exactly what you were supposed to do. You existed. She smiled at that small and relieved and went back to eating. Later, when the apartment was quiet again, I opened the latest email from the attorney. Short, precise. Confirmation that requests had been acknowledged and timelines set. I closed the laptop and leaned back in the chair, listening to the hum of the building settling around us, aware of the pressure shifting as people realized their words weren't slowing anything down. I slid the notice out of the envelope and flattened it against the table with my palm, smoothing the crease like that would make the words easier to absorb. Temporary restrictions. Review in progress. Access limited pending verification. It wasn't dramatic language. It wasn't supposed to be. That was the point. Maya was at school when the first bank called. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to it twice, not for tone, but for content. They wanted confirmation. They wanted documentation. They wanted things in writing. Good. I returned the call from my desk voice, even answers short. Yes, no, attached, sent. By mid-morning, the second call came in. Then the third. Different departments. Same questions. Each one required Lauren to explain something she'd never expected to have to explain to anyone who knew how to read a ledger. The attorney emailed me a single sentence around noon. They've initiated a full audit. I didn't reply. I forwarded it to my records folder and went back to work. That afternoon, Maya's teacher emailed to ask if everything was okay at home. Nothing alarming, just a check-in. I appreciated the neutrality. I replied that we were fine and thanked her for reaching out. Fine had a different meaning now. It meant contained. When I got home, there were 2 more envelopes waiting by the door. Certified. I signed for them, stacked them neatly on the counter, and started dinner like any other night. Pasta. Jarred sauce. Easy. Lauren didn't wait long. She called while the water was boiling. What did you do? She demanded. I asked questions, I said. You froze accounts, she said. I can't access anything. That's what happens when auditors get involved, I said. They limit risk. You had no right, she said. I had every right, I said. You had access. You abused it. She laughed, sharp and brittle. You don't even know what you're talking about. I know the dates, I said. I know the amounts. And I know the routing numbers don't match mine. Silence. Then quieter. You're blowing this out of proportion. I didn't make the numbers, I said. They exist whether you like them or not. She hung up. That night my father emailed me for the first time instead of calling. Long paragraphs. Careful words. A reminder of everything the family had done for me. How hard it was to manage things while I was gone. How grateful I should be. I read it once and archived it without responding. The next morning, an alert hit my phone before I'd finished my coffee. A transaction attempt had been declined. I didn't smile. I noted the time. The audit moved faster than I expected. Not because anyone was rushing, because the trail was clean. Transfers matched expenditures. Explanations repeated. Patterns held. By the end of the week, the attorney sent me a preliminary summary. Nothing official yet, just enough to confirm what I already knew. Unauthorized use. Commingled funds. Repeated over multiple years. Not a misunderstanding. A habit. Lauren stopped calling and started texting. This is ruining everything. You're hurting Mom. How could you do this to me? I didn't respond. My mother tried again, showing up at the apartment unannounced. I watched her through the peephole while she adjusted her coat and smoothed her hair, rehearsing something in her head. I didn't open the door. She left a note taped to the frame instead. Please call me. We're scared. I took it down and put it in the folder. Scared was appropriate. At work, I kept my head down. I didn't mention anything to anyone. I didn't need sympathy or speculation. I needed my routine intact. Structure is a form of armor. Still, I could feel the pressure building on the other side of the process. The audit wasn't just about numbers. It was about explanations. And explanations require consistency. Lauren didn't have that. One afternoon, as I was packing up to leave, the attorney called again. They're asking for original authorization documents, he said. Not copies. I figured they would, I said. They've noticed the signature variations, he said. Enough to ask questions. That signature was mine, I said. The use wasn't. That distinction matters, he said. A lot. When I got home, Maya was doing homework at the table, tongue pressed against her lip in concentration. She looked up when I walked in. Grandma called my tablet, she said. I didn't answer. Good, I said. You don't have to. She sounded upset, Maya said. People get upset when they lose control, I said. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong. She nodded and went back to her math. Later, while she was brushing her teeth, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number, I answered. This is ridiculous, Lauren said. Her voice was different now. Lower, tired. They're asking me to explain things I don't remember. Then you shouldn't have done them, I said. You think this makes you better than me? She snapped. I think it makes me careful, I said. You always thought you were smarter, she said. I think I was paying attention, I said. She started crying then. Not the dramatic kind. The quiet, angry kind that comes when someone realizes the ground is shifting under them and there's nothing left to grab. You're going to take everything from me, she said. I'm taking nothing, I said. I'm returning it to where it was supposed to be. She hung up without another word. That night after Maya fell asleep, I spread the latest documents across the table again. New annotations. Requests for clarification. Deadlines. The audit had moved from internal review to formal reconciliation. The language tightened. The margin for excuses narrowed. I aligned the papers, stacked them neatly, and slid them back into the folder, aware of the way the balance had shifted not just in accounts, but in the space between what my family believed they could get away with and what the records were starting to say on their own. The courthouse smelled like disinfectant and old paper, the kind of place where nothing personal mattered unless it could be proven. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder and walked through security without looking around for familiar faces. I already knew who would be there. Lauren was sitting 2 rows behind my parents when I entered the hearing room. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically just compressed like someone had folded her into a version of herself that fit the room better. Her leg bounced under the table. She stopped when she saw me and folded her hands in her lap. I didn't sit next to my family. I sat where my attorney told me to sit. The judge entered without ceremony. Everyone stood. Everyone sat. No one acknowledged anyone else. It was efficient in a way family never is. The first few minutes were procedural. Names on record. Case numbers. Clarifications. The kind of language that sounds harmless until you realize it's cutting away everything that isn't relevant. Lauren's attorney spoke first. Calm. Polished. He framed the issue as confusion. Overlapping responsibilities. A family trying to support a child while her mother was frequently absent due to military obligations. I kept my eyes on the table. When my attorney stood, he didn't argue tone. He didn't correct the story emotionally. He corrected it chronologically. Dates, amounts, authorizations. The same timeline I'd built at my kitchen table now projected on a screen where no one could look away. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Let's be clear," she said. "This is not a question of intent at this stage. This is a question of access and use." Lauren's attorney nodded quickly as if that was acceptable. It wasn't. The auditor's report was introduced next. Neutral language. No accusations. Just documentation. Patterns. Repeated use of funds outside the scope of authority. Lauren stared straight ahead. When the judge asked who had initiated the transfers, Lauren's attorney hesitated for half a second too long before answering. "My client," he said, under the belief she was acting in the child's best interest. The judge didn't react. "And where did those funds go?" she asked. There was a pause. Pages shuffled. The answer came slower this time. "Various expenses," he said. "Household related." The judge raised an eyebrow. "The household of the child." Another pause. "No," he said. That was the moment Lauren looked at me, not with anger, with calculation. Like she was trying to remember when I'd stopped being predictable. The judge turned to me for the first time. "Captain Caldwell," she said, "do you dispute the accuracy of these records?" "No," I said. "I dispute the justification." She nodded. "Understood." Lauren's attorney tried again. He brought up the power of attorney. The signature. The authority I'd granted while deployed. My attorney stood immediately. Temporary. Limited. Revoked upon return. The judge glanced at the document. "That's correct," she said. Lauren finally spoke, then breaking protocol just enough to make the room tense. "I was helping," she said. She wasn't around. The judge looked at her directly. "You were authorized to assist," she said. "Not to decide." Lauren opened her mouth, then closed it again. My mother shifted in her seat. My father stared at the floor. The judge continued, voice steady. "The court is ordering an immediate reconciliation of all accounts associated with the minor child. All unauthorized transfers are to be documented. Pending further review, access remains restricted." She paused. "This is not optional." Lauren's attorney leaned in and whispered something to her. She shook her head. Slightly eyes fixed on the table now. As people began gathering papers, the judge added one more thing. "I will remind all parties," she said, "that this court's interest is the welfare of the child. Not family harmony. Not convenience." The room emptied quickly after that. No conversations. No eye contact. Just the scrape of chairs and the rustle of documents being tucked away. Outside, Lauren caught up to me near the elevators. "You didn't have to do it like this," she said quietly. "This is the only way you listen," I said. "You always think you're right," she said. "I think records matter," I said. "That hasn't changed." She laughed, once bitter and short. "You think this is over." "I think the truth is boring," I said. "And that's not good news for you." My parents stood a few feet away, pretending to study a bulletin board that hadn't been updated in years. My mother looked at me like she wanted to say something meaningful and didn't know how. I didn't wait. On the drive home, Maya asked if the building I'd gone into was a school. "No," I said. "It's a place where people have to explain themselves." "Did Aunt Lauren explain?" she asked. "Not very well," I said. She nodded and went back to looking out the window legs tucked up under her, humming softly to herself. At home, I checked my email before dinner. 2 new messages. One confirming receipt of additional documentation. Another outlining next steps in plain language. No deadlines emphasized. No threats. Just process. I closed the laptop and started cooking. The smell of onions filled the kitchen. Maya set the table without being asked, careful with the plates lining them up evenly. While we ate, my phone buzzed once with a message from an unknown number. This didn't have to happen. I set the phone face down and kept eating, aware of the way the day had shifted something fundamental. Not with a bang, but with the quiet, relentless movement of facts settling into places they could no longer be argued out of. I folded the court notice once, then again, not because it needed folding, but because my hands needed something to do. The paper was heavier than it looked, the kind of weight that doesn't come from ink, but from what it confirms. Maya was at the table, finishing breakfast, swinging her legs gently under the chair. She watched me out of the corner of her eye, pretending not to. "Is that from the Explain Yourself building?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Is it bad?" she asked. "No," I said. "It's clear." That seemed to satisfy her. She went back to her cereal like clarity was enough to keep the day on track. The final hearing didn't look any different from the first one. Same room, same tables, same neutral walls that refused to take sides. The difference was in the way everyone sat. Lauren didn't bounce her leg this time. She sat stiff, shoulders tight, jaw clenched like she was holding something back. My parents looked older, not dramatically, just worn like people who had spent months pretending nothing was wrong and were finally running out of energy. The judge didn't waste time. She summarized the findings in a voice that never rose or softened. Unauthorized transfers, repeated misuse, lack of documentation supporting claims of necessity, clear deviation from fiduciary duty. Lauren's attorney tried one last angle. Family context, good intentions, shared responsibility. The judge stopped him with a raised hand. "Intent doesn't replace obligation," she said. "And family doesn't excuse mismanagement." She turned to Lauren. "You were trusted with access," she said. "You treated it as ownership." Lauren shook her head slightly like she wanted to disagree but couldn't find the words. The ruling came next. Restitution. Full reimbursement of diverted funds. Interest. Legal fees. Removal from any role involving financial authority over the child. It wasn't dramatic. No gavel slam. Just sentences laid out cleanly, one after another, each one closing a door Lauren had assumed would always be open. My mother let out a small sound that might have been a breath, or might have been a sob. My father didn't move at all. The judge finished with a reminder that sounded less like advice and more like fact. "This court is not interested in repairing relationships," she said. "It exists to protect minors and enforce the law." That was it. Outside, Lauren stopped me again, this time in the parking lot. Her face was red, her voice tight. "You won," she said. "Is that what you wanted?" "I wanted my daughter protected," I said. "This was the result of your choices." "You could have handled this quietly," she said. "I did," I said. "For years." My father approached, then hands shoved into his coat pockets like he didn't know what to do with them anymore. "You didn't have to take everything," he said. "I didn't take anything," I said. The court returned what was taken. He looked at me like he wanted to argue and couldn't find a place to start. On the drive home, Maya was quiet. Not withdrawn, just thoughtful. She pressed her forehead against the window and watched the city pass by. "Are we in trouble?" she asked after a while. "No," I said. "We're done." That word seemed to settle her. She nodded and leaned back in her seat, eyes closing for a moment, like her body had finally decided it could rest. The money didn't arrive all at once. It came in structured deposits, each one confirmed with an email and a reference number. I checked every entry carefully, not because I expected another trick, but because I was done trusting without verifying. I paid off what needed to be paid. Medical bills, fees, the small things that add up when you're busy surviving. I set the rest aside in accounts that required my approval and no one else's. Layers of access, layers of documentation. Lauren stopped contacting me after the first payment went through. My mother tried once more, sending a long message about regret and misunderstanding. I read it, then archived it without replying. Understanding wasn't the issue. Accountability was. One evening while I was sorting through mail, Maya wandered into the kitchen and leaned against the counter. "Are we still family with them?" she asked. I thought about the question longer than she probably expected. "We're related," I said. "But family is who keeps you safe." She nodded slowly, absorbing it, then smiled like she liked the answer. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a final message from my father. "You've changed." I stared at it for a long moment before typing back. "I learned." I turned the phone off and set it in the drawer. The apartment quiet around me, aware of the way something heavy had finally shifted, not with forgiveness or closure, but with the simple, undeniable fact that silence had a cost, and someone else had finally been forced to pay it. I moved the last box into the trunk, just as the sun started to clear the roofline of the building across the street. It wasn't a dramatic move. No arguments, no speeches, just a change of address and fewer keys on my ring. Maya sat on the curb with her backpack beside her, swinging her legs, and eating a granola bar like this was any other morning. She watched the movers finish up, then looked back at me. "Is this the new place?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Closer to base, better locks." She nodded, satisfied with that level of detail. The new apartment wasn't bigger. It was brighter. More light in the mornings. Fewer corners that held echoes. The kind of place where you didn't feel watched by old expectations the moment you walked in. We unpacked the essentials first. Beds, dishes, the box labeled school that I'd packed myself to make sure it didn't disappear. Maya claimed her room, immediately dropping her backpack on the floor and spreading out on the carpet like she was testing the space. "I like it," she said. "It's quiet." That mattered more than square footage. The routine settled quickly. Morning alarms. Breakfast that didn't feel rushed. Evenings where I didn't brace myself for the phone to ring. I changed my number and didn't tell anyone who hadn't earned it. At work, no one asked questions. I didn't offer explanations. The system respects silence when it's backed by performance. My evaluations stayed clean. My schedule stayed full. The money stayed where it was supposed to stay. I set up accounts that required my approval and no one else's. Alerts for every movement. Paper trails that led exactly where they should. I didn't celebrate when the final confirmation came through. I filed it. Maya stopped asking about her grandparents. Not all at once. Just gradually, like a habit that fades when it's no longer reinforced. She slept through the night. She stopped apologizing for taking up space. One evening, we were at the grocery store, arguing quietly in the cereal aisle about whether chocolate counted as breakfast if you added fruit. She was making a serious case for strawberries. I realized something in the middle of it. I wasn't scanning the room. No tension in my shoulders. No mental checklist of exits. No rehearsed explanations waiting to be deployed. We were just there. That was the victory. The holidays came and went without obligation. We made our own traditions. Pancakes for dinner. Movies we'd already seen. A tree that leaned slightly to the left, no matter how much we adjusted the stand. Maya laughed without checking my face first. One night while we were doing dishes together, she handed me a plate and asked, "What does family mean?" I dried my hands and thought about it. "Family is who keeps you safe," I said. "Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." She nodded and went back to splashing water everywhere like 8-year-olds do when they feel secure enough to be messy. I heard things secondhand after that. About downsizing. About awkward holidays. About how Lauren avoided certain stores now. None of it reached me directly. I didn't block everyone. I just stopped participating. Silence, it turns out, can be chosen. One afternoon, months later, a letter showed up from an address I recognized. My mother's handwriting. Careful. Controlled. I opened it, read it once, and set it aside. There were apologies in it. Explanations. Regret that came late and wanted credit for showing up at all. I didn't respond. Maya came home from school that day with a drawing. 2 stick figures holding hands in front of a small house. "That's us," she said. "We look happy." "We are," I said. That night after she fell asleep, I sat on the edge of her bed for a while and watched her breathe. I thought about the version of myself who would have swallowed the shove-made excuses and called it peace. The version who would have taught her daughter that belonging was something fragile and conditional. That woman felt distant now. Not erased, just outgrown. I didn't save my family. I saved my child. And in doing that, I saved myself. The phone buzzed once on the counter while I was making coffee the next morning. An unknown number. I let it ring until it stopped. Outside, the day moved on. Traffic, schedules, normal life. Maya came into the kitchen, hair sticking up, rubbing her eyes. "Mom," she said, "can we have pancakes tonight?" I smiled. "Yes," I said, "we can." I used to think family was something you endured, something you explained away, something you protected even when it hurt you. I don't believe that anymore. This wasn't about winning money or proving anyone wrong. It was about choosing my child over a version of family that demanded silence in exchange for belonging. Family revenge stories don't always end with shouting or apologies. Sometimes they end quietly with boundaries, safety, and a child who finally knows she matters. If this story felt familiar, it's because family drama often hides behind polite words and closed doors. If you're drawn to real revenge stories, family revenge stories, and true family drama, where justice comes without violence, consider subscribing to the channel. These are stories about standing your ground, protecting what matters, and walking away when that's the strongest choice you have.